Okay, well, we're about ready to get started, I think. My name is Ruben Sussman, and I'm the Director of the Behavior and Human Dimensions Program here at the American Council for an Energy Efficient Economy. I'll be hosting the webinar today with Maxime, who's going to be taking your questions and answering anything urgent. I also co-chair the annual Behavior, Energy, and Climate Change Conference, which is sponsoring this webinar. Before we get started, I just wanted to let you all know that BECC this year has made the bold decision to go virtual, which is something we're really excited about. Several members have asked us to go virtual for a few years now, so we're really happy to be able to offer this free, cheaper, low carbon, more convenient option. And I hope that you can all join us. Thank you for those who've completed our survey. And we have lots of ideas for keeping the conference fun and social, so you can meet business contacts and friends as you might expect from BECC. And just to follow that up, we've decided to reopen abstract submissions. And that's because a number of you have said, hey, now that it's cheaper and more convenient, I know I can go, so I want to submit an abstract. Please do that at the BECC website before July 24th, or by July 24th, I should say. And sorry about that. And you can submit an abstract for an individual presentation, one of our virtual posters, a panel discussion, or a workshop. Now, if you're interested in a branded workshop as a sponsor, gets you more exposure, please let us know about that and we can arrange it as well. If you already submitted an abstract, it's under review, so have no fear, you'll hear from us shortly. And of course, very importantly, I want to extend a special thanks to our sponsors. If you want to become a sponsor, you want your name in front of the 300 plus people that attend our webinars, then please let us know and we will hook you up. Our next webinar is not yet announced. Also, I wanted to let you guys know to please mute yourselves if you are not speaking, those of us on the panel. Like I said, a mystery guest for September. We don't know who it's going to be just yet, but we're going to skip August because ACEEE is holding the Summer Study for Buildings, which I highly recommend. If you haven't signed up for that virtual conference, please check it out. And we'll see you back here on the webinar series in September. And of course, before we get started, a few logistics as always. All attendees are currently in listen-only mode. You can ask questions, though, and to do that, you type it into the Q&A box. We're trying out a new tech platform, as you can see, and I think it's a really exciting new opportunity. And we're going to be testing out a lot of new technologies that are available through this platform today, so that's exciting. If you want to test out the Q&A box, you can do that at any time, and Maxime will handle your questions. We'll ask the questions to the panelists at the end. Now, don't forget, as usual, our webinar is being recorded, so you don't need to scramble to write everything down. We'll send you a link right after the webinar, and we'll post it on the BECC website. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce today's speakers. Julie is the co-author of the Environmental Marketing Imperative. She founded C+C in 2005, a communications agency using social marketing principles to improve recycling, reduce energy waste, inspire people to use public transit. She generally wants to make the world a healthier, happier place. Nancy is a former director of marketing for Seattle Children's Hospital. While there, she led an ambitious and successful social marketing campaign, resulting in a 25% increase in LifeVest usage among children. In 1993, she founded her company, Social Marketing Services, and over the past 25 years has co-authored 13 books on social marketing with Philip Kotler. These books are used to train program managers and use the 10-step model for strategic social marketing planning. So I'd like to invite Julie and Nancy to turn on your webcams now and take it from here. Julie, please turn on your webcam when you have a moment. Thanks. Okay. Is Julie starting, or Nancy, are you going to go first here?
There we go. Did that work?
Okay.
Sorry.
Yeah, we can see you. Hi, Julie.
Sorry about that. Our practice, that didn't happen. I'm not sure why it happened this time. Super excited to be here today. Nancy and I have created this presentation around the 10 pitfalls that we often see when people are planning their social marketing campaigns and programs. So we've organized this that we'll talk about each pitfall, and then either Nancy or I will give an example, a case study that illustrates how that pitfall can be avoided. We also have about 4 quizzes built into the presentation today, so pay attention, and there's going to be a chance to answer some questions and see how you're picking up on this content. But our real goal is to have you get some takeaways that you can use in your daily work as you're planning social marketing campaigns. So to kick us off here, we'll start with our first pitfall, which is when your objectives for your campaign are not measurable. There's a quote I really like from Alice in Wonderland that says, if you don't know where you're going, any road will get you there. And what that really illustrates that is if you fail to set measurable objectives up front, it's very unlikely that you're going to actually achieve them, right? Many of you may have had this happen where you've done a campaign, you get to the end and your boss or someone up the chain says, hey, why didn't you achieve X? But it turns out whatever X is was not actually articulated as an objective you were trying to achieve at the beginning. So the solution to this is to really make sure that at the very beginning that you have agreement upon what goal you're trying to achieve, what are the measurable objectives that are going to tell you if you're making it to your goal. This is really the most important part of the social marketing planning process.
So this is an example of a campaign that did ambitious one county metro's Just One Trip campaign had a purpose to address congestion in King County and the resulting impact on CO2 emissions. When the program was launched in 2013, a goal was established to engage 20,000 participants by 2020. By 2017, 4 years later, there were only 5,000 who had signed up for the Just One Trip try. A new campaign was launched then with a goal to reach that 20,000 target by January 2020. The priority audience for the campaign was English and Spanish-speaking residents likely to try transit, those in the ready for actions phase. The focus of the campaign was a pledge this time. A pledge, just one trip, to use alternative transportation instead of driving alone. Next. Or should I do it? Okay. So multilingual one-on-one conversations at community events was one of the real keys to this. They were a key to an outreach strategy that included a team of multilingual ambassadors at these events, providing personalized answers to in-depth questions and ways to address barriers, often deploying roving street teams at the event to optimize conversation versus the traditional 2 staffers sitting at a table. An attention-grabbing in-language direct mailer was sent to those most likely to try transit, sent to 130,000 high-propensity households in the program area, and making the sign-up process easy with a postage-paid reply card. The website was transcreated in both Spanish and English, focusing on moving residents from awareness to action with an emphasis on taking the pledge. Outcome. There were 21,162 program sign-up goal and 4 times the sign-up from the first phase of the campaign. These sign-ups represent over 621 annualized drive-alone trips reduced, equivalent to 8.2 million pounds of CO2 emissions reduced.
All right, so moving on to pitfall number 2. So pitfall number 2 is when you have too many behaviors to focus on. You want to tell people or try to get people to do many, many things. And what I'll say to everyone here today is that if you try to tell people to do multiple things, to do everything, they probably will do nothing. It's just overwhelming for folks. So it's very, very important that you do choose one behavior at a time. And yes, I know this is hard. On many social issues that many of us work on, we want people to do 5 things, 10 things, 20 things. But if you want your campaign to be successful, you really do need to focus on one behavior at a time. So how do you do that? This chart that you're looking at here is one way for you to prioritize your behavior changes. So if you've got a list of 10 behavior changes you're trying to target, get in a room with the folks who know the audience and what you're trying to achieve, and map your behavior changes in terms of which ones will have the most impact on achieving your goal, and which ones will you have the highest probability of actually being able to change that behavior. So the behaviors that fall in this upper right quadrant are the ones that you should focus on. But remember, you do need to focus on a singular behavior, one behavior at a time.
And this is an example of a campaign that narrowed an abundance of potential options for dealing with food waste to one. It was a campaign developed by Metro Regional Government in Portland and the Oregon Food Bank. It was branded Fork It Over. In 2004, in Portland, Oregon, it was estimated that 180,000 tons of food, solid waste system, and at the same time, the priority audience for this reduction were restaurants. And the behavior to be influenced was to, instead of putting the food in the compost food waste, even the garbage bins, the campaign intended to influence restaurants to donate their edible surplus food to agencies to serve the hungry. Interviews with restaurant owners. Oops.
Sorry about that.
That's okay, thanks. Interviews with restaurant owners identified what would motivate these managers. They learned that they would be more likely to do this if someone would pick up the food at the restaurant rather than having to package it up and take it to somewhere. They wanted it to be picked up at a time that was convenient for them, and they wanted and got to choose what agency in the area would receive the food. The program provided these features, and results were impressive. Over a period of 5 years, 18 million pounds were donated to food banks. The food, if it had been purchased and prepared, was worth 17 million. And importantly, disposal cost of over 640,000 avoided.
All right, now it's really quiz time. So we'll give everyone about 30 or 40 seconds here to answer the following quiz, and then we will publish results. So go ahead and take a look at those questions. All right, let's see how we did. All right, wow. We've got an even distribution of the answers. So the answer to this one is A and C. So pick the one that will most quickly and efficiently get you to your goal, and do research to determine which one the audience is most likely to act upon. So thank you. All right. Moving on to pitfall number 3. So pitfall number 3 is when you're buried in barriers. So I'm sure any of you who have done a social marketing planning process, when you get in the room and you're brainstorming your barriers and motivators, typically what happens is it's really easy to come up with a very, very long list of barriers, right? The barriers flow, where it's a lot harder to come up with the list of the motivators and what's going to motivate your audience to act. So it's great to come up with a big list, but you do need to pick the key barrier that you think is preventing your audience from doing the behavior you want them to do. Because in your messaging, you're really only going to have time to come across with one way to overcome the barrier. So pick one barrier, and then this is a great time to do a reality check for your campaign. So think about, for this behavior with this barrier, can I realistically overcome it? And if I can't, maybe you need to go back to the beginning of your process and redefine your goal and redefine your behavior. So if your barrier is too big and you don't have a way to overcome it, you may want to rethink things. But again, here, you need to be singular. You need to pick the key barrier. Over to you, Nancy. Nancy, are you there?
Success story regarding pain to reduce was in fact the time that was taken to identify the barriers to a proposed behavior and then basically to be adopted. So in 2017, survey identified that 1 in 10 high-school suicide. Research with the students indicated that the best person to help would be a friend. So the priority audience was a friend of a student who seemed depressed or anxious. The first behavior then tested with the students was for the friend to ask, "Are you thinking of committing suicide?" The response from students was clear that they were really unlikely to ask that question. They worried it might put the thought in the friend's mind and make it more likely. Instead, they suggested they would be comfortable asking their friend, "Are you okay?" Next. A pilot campaign branded Start a Convo, Save a Life was launched and evaluated in a couple of middle schools in the state. A video we'll share in just a moment was posted on social media and Tumblr. Outreach in the high schools included posters, counselors, and as the graphic on the top of the slide shows, there was a cafeteria takeover with signage suggesting what the friend could say to their depressed friend that might help. So for the pilot, the campaign created 3.2 million impressions, a 5.5% click-through rate for the video, with an 85% video completion rate, and 7,200 visits to the Tumblr site. We will now share the video. As a content warning, discussion of suicidal ideation is included in the video we're about to show. So feel free to mute or step away. It's about 3 minutes long.
I don't know, I just kind of felt like alone. I mean, I didn't really see any point. Nobody wants me around, I'll just take care of it.
It was about how he didn't like his life and he didn't want to be here anymore and how he wanted to end it.
I think some part of me wanted him to come over to stop me, but another part was ready to not be there anymore.
I know he owns guns because he goes hunting, and so he has a gun just in his room, and so I knew that I needed to see him and make sure that he was okay. I knew that I needed to be there for him, and he needed a friend. As soon as I got there, he looked at me and we didn't break a stare for the longest time until we started hugging.
He was crying and I was crying, and it was just kind of like a dam broke, you know, all the emotion just kind of between the two of us just kind of came out.
After that, we sat on his bed and talked about why he wanted to do this and why he felt like this needed to happen.
We decided that it was best if I go see a therapist or a psychologist and get some help.
What do you think would have happened if Alec hadn't come over?
I don't think I'd be sitting here right now.
So he told us today that he doesn't think he would be here if it wasn't for you. How
Wow.
does that feel?
It's amazing. I saved a life. Get help immediately. Don't wait till the last moment to help them out, because you never know when it's going to be too late.
The best thing to do is to be there and show them that you care more than they think you do. Because you never know what small gesture is going to change someone's life.
right. That is a bit hard to watch, but it's a great example of overcoming the barrier, and in this case, having these teens show and model to other teens how to have the conversation with a friend, which was the key barrier in that campaign. All right. We're going to move on to pitfall number 4, which is cognitive what? You probably remember this maybe from your psychology class that you took in college, but cognitive dissonance is when a person's values, attitudes, and beliefs do not match their behaviors. And this is true for many, many social marketing issues. The trap I think we sort of fall into sometimes is assuming that cognitive dissonance will actually make it easier to change their behaviors. Because if you've got people with values and beliefs that align, aren't they automatically going to change their behavior? And the answer to that, as research proves, is simply no. And in fact, it can often make it harder. What I mean by that is if the audience in their mind believes that they are doing a good job, they have the values, they don't necessarily pay attention to the messages you're sending them into the marketplace because they've already checked the box and they think they're done with what they need to do. So what do you do about that if you're in this trap? The first thing you need to do is to point out the cognitive dissonance in the mind of the audience. And if you can do that, you can have a powerful foundation for success for your social marketing campaign. So I'm going to give a brief example about this that has to do with recycling. So in King County, 94% of the public, this was about a few years ago, said that they thought it was very important to recycle. And they also said that they really already recycled everything they possibly could. Yet we knew that 50% of what was ending up in garbage cans was still recyclable. So that's a classic example of cognitive dissonance where the values and the beliefs were not matching the recycling behaviors in people's homes. So King County Solid Waste Division created the Recycle More campaign with really 2 driving elements. The first was to point out to folks that people weren't doing as good of a job of recycling as maybe they thought they were. And then secondly, to help them overcome the specific barriers that were keeping them from recycling everything they should. And the example here is a sign on the side of a garbage truck saying, pointing out the issue that, hey, half of what's in this truck is still recyclable. We can do better. They also used things like contests and competitions and other methods to get out and really get specific about how to overcome barriers for recycling. The end result was a 3% increase in pounds recycled per household after this campaign, as well as a 25% decrease of recyclables in the garbage. So overwhelmingly a success, but we had to point out first that the problem was there and that we weren't done, it hadn't been solved. All right, we're on for quiz time number 2. I'll give everybody a few minutes to answer this quiz. All right, let's see how we did. Wow, perfect. We've got a 97, so a 98% correct rate on that one. Cognitive dissonance is when the audience's values do not match their behaviors. All right, let's move on to pitfall number 5. So pitfall number 5 is believing that your audience is the public or your audience is everyone. Neither of those things are ever true. If you try to be everything to everybody, you're not going to be anything to anybody. And I know this can often be an issue, especially when we're working on public sector campaigns where there is a responsibility to try to reach all residents or everybody who lives in a certain community. But to be efficient and effective with the tax dollars being invested in those programs, it's really important that you still pick who your priority audience is and communicate directly to them based on what their barriers are and what their motivators are for each behavior change. And those barriers and motivators will never be the same for the public and for everybody. So even if you have to do one behavior at a time to different priority audiences, that's a great solution, to get. Eventually you'll reach everybody, but you're going to do it once at a time using a good framework to get there. So remember, make sure you identify your priority audiences and you do one audience at a time.
Well, there could have been many audiences of Washington Wildlife and Natural Resources, as well as the EPA, to address the wicked problem of diminishing shoreline habitats and the impact this was having on the health of Puget Sound. But the team prioritized one audience perceived to have a significant impact on shorelines: residential shoreline property owners with bulkheads and those considering installing one. What they wanted these shoreline property owners to do was to remove bulkheads with soft shore protection efforts, things like rocks and logs and native plants. Next. The campaign, branded Shore Friendly, created and implemented several interventions to assist these homeowners. They provided free face-to-face visits, helping the property owner to find the best soft shore armor options for their skill building workshops. They provided mini grants as well as assistance with the permit process, and they provided yard signs to help spread the word. And a website gave access to all of these resources. In the end, 600 property owners participated in the workshops, 400 landowners received on-site visits, and in terms of impact, 2,000 linear shoreline armor on Puget Sound was removed.
Excellent. All right, we're on to pitfall number 6. And pitfall number 6 has to do with audience assumptions. And specifically, and I'm sure you've seen this happen in your work, but you can never assume that the audience is like you or thinks like you or believes like you. You are way too close to whatever issue you're working on, as well as your colleagues. And so whatever your opinions are about those issues, they do not match that of your target audience, because your target audience is not as educated as you are about your audience. So what do you do about this? You do research with your target audience to figure out how they do think, feel, and behave related to your issue. Develop profiles that dig into the demographics and go beyond demographics into psychographics and beliefs and values and feelings, so that you really understand, how your audience thinks and behaves related to whatever issue you are working on. Really important to spend some time, if you can, with your audience, learning about them and how they think, feel, and what they do. So, really in this case, the only opinion that matters is the opinion of your target audience. So if other people try to interject and say, well, I think this, that, or the other, you need to loop back and say, well, what we really care about is what my target audience thinks. And here's what I know based on the research I've done with them.
Well, here's an example of one where the time was really taken to understand that audience. In 2019, the Washington State Department of Health developed and implemented a campaign branded "It's About Respect." The problem was gender-based sexual violence had come to the forefront in recent years as a result of the Me Too movement. And a state youth survey found that 18% of 10th graders reported having been made to engage in unwanted kissing, sexual touch, or intercourse. The priority audience. The team decided to prioritize youth at an earlier age than high school and selected a priority audience for the first phase to be middle school boys. The campaign team collaborated in a co-design with middle schoolers who advised campaign planners to stress that it's not cool to make others uncomfortable. The behavior stressed them that they should respect the bodies of others just as they expect others to respect their own bodies. As you can see from the examples of the posters, the team focused the strategy on driving that point home. Yes, thank you. So the partners in this intervention were the several schools were selected for a pilot program. And there were geo-targeted animated banners in these locations. The creative concept that middle schoolers wanted to hear, and that they also responded to things that were a little quirky, like talking cats. So the team developed a YouTube video we will share in just a moment. The outcomes. A post-campaign survey was conducted with the control school, which indicated that those in the pilot school were 39% more likely to ask permission before touching, 20% more in agreement that they think will make others uncomfortable, and 7 school posters and 25% recall name. So we can now view the video.
Everyone's got a personal bubble. Think about how you'd feel if someone didn't respect yours. Different people have different boundaries. Always ask.
It's about respect.
Excellent. That's a great example of anybody on that planning team for that project was not a middle school aged boy. So you really did have to trust the audience there to come up with the campaign concept. All right, let's move on to pitfall number 7, which is failing to trust the research. So here's how this usually goes. Many of us who works with small budgets, are super excited when we get to do research. So yay, we get to do research. We incorporate the ideas, the thoughts, the plans into our social marketing campaign plan. But then as we're moving forwards to producing things and implementing, the edits start coming in from up the chain. And, the input flows into, can't we do this? Can't we do that? And I think it's really often what happens is that those edits change things in a way that take you away from what the research told you. So very important that you trust your research. If you spend the time to do it, once you get it done, make yourself a little one-pager like a research brief. Keep it at the top of your folder for that program or on your desktop so you can refer back to it. And if people are suggesting edits or changes to what you're implementing that go counter to what you learned in the research, you pull that out and you make the case about why you need to leave things the way they are. And that way your end product hopefully will continue to align closely with what you learned in the research, even when you get, through the editing and approval processes that so many of us face in the work that we do.
Well, this next case is clearly one where we should have trusted the research. With a purpose to protect water supply in the region, Seattle Public Utilities launched a campaign to influence single-family residents with gardens to come to a special event to get a rain barrel, one that would collect the water from the home's roof. At the time, there were approximately 300,000 single-family homes in the city of Seattle. So the city had purchased 1,500 rain barrels and were wanted to see it set a price that would make it likely the barrels would be appealing. A survey they did indicated there was a significant price elasticity, with 16% of respondents saying they would be interested at $29.95, but only 5% at $80. Keep in mind that 16% of $29.95 would be more than 40,000 homes, and they only had 1,500 barrels. Next. So the special one-day event was held in a park in Seattle on a Saturday from 9 to 3. The team chose the price of $32, not $80, with interest in assuring that the rain barrels would be purchased. They wanted this pilot to work. The event was promoted with postcards mailed to these homes, public service announcements, email newsletters, and displays at garden shows. And then a week before the event, a full-page news story about the project appeared in the local newspaper. They were so impressed with what was happening. The outcomes were surprising, but perhaps shouldn't have been given the research. 1,500 barrels were purchased by 9:15. Remember, it opened at 9. And there was a 1-mile lineup of cars on a major roadway that were turned away. Subsequent events leveraged these learnings to be more trusting of research and included reservations and a scheduled time for pickup.
Excellent. All right, it's time for our third quiz. Give everybody a minute to fill this out. right, let's see how people did on this one. There we go, 99.1%. You should always define a specific priority audience and behavior you are trying to change and test that message with members of your audience. So yes, that is the correct answer. All right, we are going to move on to pitfall number 8, which is all about message clutter. And this is really, think about it as your competition. Everyone that's on this call, on this webinar today, and in society is exposed to something like 2,000 to 3,000 messages every single day coming at you from all different channels. And as a marketer, you have about 3 seconds to catch someone's attention and have them decide to look further whatever information you're trying to send to them. On top of that, after you catch attention, if you're a millennial, you spend an average of 14 seconds looking further at the information. But wait, it gets worse, because if you're Gen Z, you only spend 8 seconds. So this rolls back to the theme that you've heard throughout this presentation today about needing to be very specific and very singular. You need to know who your priority audience is. You need to focus on one behavior change. You need to know what that one barrier is that's preventing that behavior change, and you need to have a strong motivator to overcome it. Because if you think about it, if you aren't that singular in how you set up your social marketing campaign, you are never going to break through the clutter and catch attention in 3 seconds, and then in a few more seconds get the audience to understand what you are trying to tell them. So then on top of that, once you've figured out your framework, the messages that you create should be as simple as possible. They should be personally relevant to that target audience, and if possible, be emotional so you can draw them in that 3 seconds that you have to catch their attention. So I'm going to give an example of this that has to do with heat pump water heaters. So this is a technology where a lot of the marketing is trying to tell the audience too much. It's a complicated technology, and it has lots of bells and whistles in terms of how it works. So when you look at ads in this category, they tend to be very detailed about the explanation of the technology. But you know what? The bottom line is that the audience really doesn't care, right? They don't care about all that technology. They will buy a heat pump water heater if they know just 2 things. That it's going to give them hot water, because that's obviously what they want, and that it will cost less to operate. That's all you have to say in terms of doing marketing that's going to catch attention and bring people in. Once you catch their attention, if they call an installer and they want to learn more, they can ask all those questions about the technology. But in order bringing them in and getting them engaged, very simple is where you need to go. The example we're looking at now is from the Northwest Energy Efficiency Alliance, and it shows how they use this simple messaging strategy to both drive customers to installers, as well as causing an uptick in utility rebates for heat pump water heaters. All right, we're on to pitfall number 9. So we're on the home stretch. We've got 2 to go. So pitfall number 9 has to do with selling features rather than benefits. And actually, we could have used the heat pump water heater case study as an example for this as well, in terms of the features being the technology that many of those ads talk about. But what this is about is that most social marketers, work on complex issues. There's lots of features. There's lots of cool stuff on the back end. But in most cases, those features are not important to the audience. Understanding how something works is not what changes behaviors. You have to instead sell the benefits to the audience. If you want to change behavior, you have to focus on that specific audience and what that benefit is to them personally for changing that behavior. So Nancy will give an example of selling features instead of benefits.
Yes, a very, very good emphasis on benefits for this one. Oh, I'm on? Okay.
No, go. Yeah, go.
In 2003, in Chesapeake Bay, there was a significant concern with declining blue crab population, very popular there. They had gone from 78 million pounds a year to 50 million, a 33% decline. The Chesapeake Bay Trust was interested in doing something to save the crabs. The campaign had created a priority audience of residential gardeners, as this was a large audience and had not been focused on in the past, and could have a significant impact. The behavior for the campaign was for these residents to skip the spring fertilizer and wait until fall. So the ask was not to stop fertilizing. It was just to stop fertilizing in the spring, which was very detrimental to the baby. Next. So the camp branding focused on the desired shipping the spring fertilizer. Of a polluted bay as a culinary, not an environmental problem, a reframing, and so they created a brand, save the crabs, then eat them. Multiple media channels were employed, including YouTube videos, posters, as well as coasters in bars, especially to launch the campaign. A post-campaign survey was promising, indicating that 25% were planning to fertilize in the spring. Next.
Excellent. All right, we're on to our final pitfall, and that is self-reporting bias. So in general, for social issues that many of us work on, people are not good reporters of their own behaviors. You know, that example I gave earlier about 94% of people saying they're just great, perfect recyclers, yet we know that that is not the case by what you see when you actually look in garbage cans, is a great example of self-reporting bias. For most social issues, people know what they think they're supposed to do. So that means if you do a poll, whether it's a phone or online, or ask people questions, there's going to be a certain percentage of the people responding who aren't really honest or forthcoming and answer how they think they're supposed to answer rather than self-reporting their true behaviors. So what do you do about this? You try to avoid using self-reporting as your evaluation metric wherever you can. It is so much better to use either like observational data, actually watching what people are doing, or looking at sales data if you're trying to sell an energy efficient product, or the amount of energy used or the amount of water used, and looking in garbage cans to see what's in there. Any of those things where you can actually look is a much better way to measure behavior change. So for our last case study today, I'm going to talk about distracted driving as it relates to self-reporting bias. So distracted driving from interacting with our phones is causing an increase in fatalities and injuries among audiences that really haven't historically had those issues at a very high rate. So in the audience that's really being impacted more is mothers of young children who are dying now in cars at much higher rates than they have historically. So research into this subject is hard because people generally know they are not supposed to touch their phone or interact with it in a big way when they're in the car. So they tend to answer that they don't when you ask them in a survey. So because of this, polling is a hard way to measure the specific campaign we're talking about here from the Washington Traffic Safety Commission, which is the On the Road, Off the Phone campaign. The campaign used a multimedia approach to address this issue and to launch a new law that was going into place in Washington State that didn't allow you to touch your phone while driving. It used a variety of different techniques, and it was able to use observational data to actually measure results. So this is people like up on overpasses looking down at people in cars, and it's a pre-post observational statewide measurement that showed a 40% of reduction of people touching their phones in cars pre and post this campaign. We wouldn't have gotten those same kind of results if we had done a poll. So being able to use observational data in this case was a great way to measure actual behavior change and avoid self-reporting bias. All right, so now we're going to go to our final quiz, and then we've got time for Q&A today. So let's launch the quiz here. All right, let's see how we did on that one. Oh, there we go. What a way to end the official part of the webinar here. 100%. Use observational and behavioral tracking evaluations instead of surveys is the way to go. Thank you so much. So now I think we're going to move into the Q&A section, and I believe Maxine is going to moderate this for us.
Yeah, thank you very much for that very engaging presentation. We've been getting a lot of questions, and we've also received some comments about the quality of the presentation and the interactivity, so thanks for that. Maxine has been diligently monitoring the question lines, so to speak, and whenever you're ready, Maxine, please read some questions. If you have any questions, remember you can type them into the Q&A box below.
Sure thing. So one question we have here is, how do you prioritize between multiple important barriers?
I can jump in, and Nancy, feel free to add on. But for barriers, it's really, you've got to figure out what the one primary thing is that's stopping someone from doing that behavior. And sometimes that's obvious, but sometimes it's not, and you really need to do research with your priority audience to figure out what that true barrier is. But you've got to figure out what that one thing is so you can overcome it. So it has to be based on target audience insights or target audience research to figure out what that is.
Yes, to get them prioritized. And it may happen, by the way, that when you get, let's say you get a list of 10 barriers, which is kind of normal, there may be some that there's nothing you can do about. And so therefore that might not fall to the top of the list. So it's a combination of ones that are really important, as well as ones that your particular effort can help address.
All right, and someone has asked if you could explain the selling feature a bit more, please.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear it. The which feature?
The selling feature.
Oh, selling benefits instead of features. Yeah, so think about it as, your audience doesn't want to buy something because of the way it works, right? Or the functioning, the back end, to think of it that way. They want to buy it based on what that personal benefit is to them. What relevance does it have to them in terms of what motivates them and what their values are? And in most cases, that's not a feature. It's not how someone's made. It's not the technology that's part of the thing. It's not even the how you should do something. It's the benefit it's going to provide. So for the save the crabs and then eat them, you get to eat some crabs if you do this, or continue to eat crabs if you do that. And that's pretty great. In the case of a heat pump water heater, it's going to cut your energy bill by 1/3. That's significant. It doesn't really matter how it does it. It matters what I get on the back end. And boy, everyone wants to save money. In that case, that was a huge motivator. So it's figuring out that side of the equation, what that benefit is, and making sure that that's how you appeal to the audience.
The world has a good way of looking at it. They said is cosmetics. What they're really wanting is what they're really buying is hope. What we ask ourselves is, what is it that they want out of the product? In our case, maybe the behavior that they're buying. What do they want in exchange for all the stuff they're going to do to change their behavior?
Okay, and then somebody else has asked, could you provide more information about the heat pump water heater campaign?
Yes, in terms of how it works. So it basically was, heat pump water heaters are an interesting category because people don't know that they need one until they fail. And then when they fail, they need it like tomorrow, right? Because, everyone needs hot water and you don't want to live without it. So part of this effort was to get consumers to be able to interact with installers that stocked heat pump water heaters, like on their emergency replacement trucks, because many of them don't put them on the emergency replacement trucks, and get those installers to, get those active leads and be able to tell those customers about the rebates, in the time of an emergency replacement. So it's a very, again, that's all back end stuff, right? The consumer doesn't care about any of that, but it makes it a very complicated product category to work on. So the way the campaign worked was a series of a website and a series of digital ads that promoted it and then drove people that clicked to connect with installers that knew about heat pump water heaters and were willing to sell those into their target audiences, and also to hook them up with those utility rebates that were applicable for them. I would be happy to send a case study on this to whoever asked that question. If they, if you shoot your email to Maxine, I could definitely give you more information. It was a cool campaign.
Okay, another question here. How do we avoid self-reporting bias for more private behaviors like recycling at home?
Well, I'll give a quick note. A quick note on that would be that you do a pre and post survey as opposed to a post survey, so that the self-reporting would have been the same incidence in your pre survey as it would be in your post survey. That's my quickest response for you.
Yeah, and it works if you've got things that are like in the middles, but in recycling where you've got 94%, you don't have anywhere to go up. So in that case, it would not have worked. But if you've got people self-reporting on your pre that are more like 40 or 50%, then you do have room to go up, and you could look at the gap, as Nancy mentioned, instead of looking at the absolutes in terms of your numbers. You know, did you move the needle? But you can't really trust the absolutes because of the bias.
Okay, and then I'm going to put these two questions together. Somebody was asking about whether or not mobile apps are a useful behavior change tool. And then someone else was asking about using social media, or social marketing, so Facebook, Instagram, etc.
Do you want me to do that one, Nancy? I can jump in. Okay, so both, yes, using mobile apps can be useful. The thing to be careful about is it's a multiple step behavior change you're asking, because typically you're going to be asking someone to download an app and then to do something with it. So we found that mobile apps work if it is a behavior or an issue that the audience is really engaged with and wants, and has sort of ongoing relationship with. If it's a one-off that you want them to download an app and do one thing and then it goes away forever, that's not going to be very motivational. But if it's an app that person is going to want to engage with over time, that could be a useful tool in your social marketing mix. Social media can also be a social tool in your social marketing mix. As a distribution channel, it obviously is the way that many, many people get their information today. And whether that's, using influencers on social media, actually doing paid ads, it is a good channel to consider, even down to TikTok at this point, to get to younger audiences. You just have to really target it, for what you're doing and what the purpose is.
Okay, another question here. Would you have recommended that the Rainbow campaign choose the higher price or develop procedures to handle the high interest?
Well, I think I probably would have recommended the higher price because it was definitely price driven. And I think that was a customer service satisfaction problem. So it should have been a higher price. More questions?
Another question here. So have you ever worked with a vegan outreach or meat reduction campaigns? Cognitive dissonance is a big challenge for vegan outreach organizations.
I have not worked, and I don't know if Nancy has, I haven't worked directly on vegan. I've worked through food waste prevention efforts. We have included messaging in there about eating meat less as being a consumption strategy to help reduce carbon footprint, but I haven't hit it as directly as that question was asked. But I think that would be a fascinating behavior to work on, that you would definitely want research into, figuring out the cognitive dissonance and all the barriers, et cetera, and who the priority audience would be that is most likely to move in that direction, and start with them.
All right. And do you have advice for selling behaviors that are associated with an increased cost, since price is often the greatest barrier for people?
I'm sorry, you cut up. I didn't hear your whole thing. Could you do it one more time?
Yes. So the question was, do you have advice for selling behaviors that are associated with an increased cost, since price is often one of the greatest barriers for people?
Well, incentives. You can do incentives. Definitely, we take a look at all four of the marketing intervention tools, and price is one of those. There are monetary incentives, and then there's non-monetary incentives. And the monetary incentives would look like a discount on something, or it would look like a rebate. like when car seats were trying to get launched into the communities, there were rebates for old car seats in order to get a good one. So rebates as an example, discounts. And then I think we should never overlook non-monetary incentives too. And the biggest non-monetary incentive that I'm aware of is a pledge. Because when you do a pledge and you pledge to do something, especially if you sign something saying you'll do it, you're much more likely to do it because the cost is that you won't respect yourself. And the incentive is that you will. And so the pledge is also in that price category as a non-monetary incentive. You might want to add something, Julie, to price.
Yeah. I was just going to say that this also intersects with your audience prioritization. So if you are in a situation where you can't offer a monetary incentive and your behavior change does have an increased cost associated with it, I think it's worth really looking at your priority audiences. And is there a segment of audiences who are willing to pay more? And in many issues there are, right? And is that segment big enough that it makes it worthwhile for your effort to go ahead and focus on that priority audience who's willing to pay a little bit more in order to do whatever you're asking them to do? If the answer is no, then you need to go back and either figure out how can you offer a monetary incentive, or you need to pick a different behavior. That's sort of that reality check that I mentioned earlier. There are times when you should say, I'm not, I want to pick a new behavior. An example of that shoreline armoring case study that Nancy talked about, getting people to remove shoreline armor is a huge, expensive problem. Getting people to not put it in to begin with is much easier because it's cheaper to do soft shore armor protections. It looks better. There's all these benefits. So just flipping the problem in that case to have a different behavior that wasn't really costly to do was a great way to get that program some momentum early on.
Okay, another question here. Are there any best practices around how long after an intervention to measure success?
It really depends very, very much on the behavior. But typically 3 months to 6 months at a minimum. Nancy, would you agree with that?
Yeah, probably more like 6 months. But it definitely depends upon whether you're in a small geographic area where it's easy to do some pre and post things, maybe even observation. So sometimes that is a matter of the geographic area that the campaign is covering.
Guys, I'm sorry to cut in here, but it looks like we've come to the end of our time, and we have so many questions. This has been a very engaging and interesting presentation, and we will send you the list of people to reply to individually that we didn't get to your questions. For those of you who are online, please take a moment to complete 2 poll questions about this new platform that we're using, ON24. I know we had some issues with Nancy's lag a little bit, but we did our best to solve those. And I think they were maybe on Nancy's end, but I'm going to click through now, and please complete these last 2 poll questions for us before we say goodbye. So first question, please rate your experience with the technology for this webinar. Okay, there's no right or wrong answer to this one. I'm not going to tell you the answers. The last question, please, don't bother answering this if you've never been to a previous webinar, but if you have, how much better or worse is this than the previous one? So my instructions here, like, if it's a 3, it's exactly the same as last time. 4 means it's better this time. 5 means it's much better this time. 2 is a little bit worse. 1 is like much worse this time than in previous webinars where we used other technology. So please just answer that last one for us. And again, thank you very much to our speakers, Nancy and Julie from C+C. And if you have a webinar or if you have a presentation to submit for this year's BECC conference, which is fully virtual, please go to beccconference.org. Please go to beccconference.org for updates on the next webinars as they come up. And stay tuned. Thank you very much for your participation today, and have a great rest of your week.
Thanks, everybody.